It was a quiet evening, the kind where everything seemed normal on the surface. The soft glow of the lamp filled the living room as Sarah scrolled through her phone, waiting for her husband, Daniel, to come home. They had been married for 12 years, a picture-perfect couple in the eyes of many. Friends often admired their bond, calling them an example of love and loyalty. But behind closed doors, not everything was as perfect as it seemed. Sarah had always trusted Daniel, without question. He was a hard-working man, always making sure their life was comfortable. His job as a financial advisor kept him busy, but he made time for her whenever he could, or at least that's what she believed. Lately, though something had been off, he had become distant. Long working hours, sudden business trips, and the constant buzzing of his phone during odd hours had become more frequent. Whenever she asked, he brushed it off, blaming work pressure. That night, while waiting for him, Sarah's mind wandered. She thought about how things used to be. Daniel used to surprise her with little notes or random coffee dates. But those gestures had slowly faded away. Maybe it was normal, she told herself. Maybe this was just what happens in long marriages. But deep down, that little voice inside her whispered that something wasn't right. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. It was Daniel, texting that he'd be late again, another meeting. She sighed, typing back a simple, "Okay?" As she placed the phone down, her eyes landed on his laptop, sitting on the dining table. He rarely let anyone touch his laptop, not even her. But tonight, curiosity got the best of her. He had always said he had nothing to hide, so what harm could it do? Her heart raced as she opened the lid. The screen lit up, asking for a password. She hesitated, feeling guilty, but something pushed her forward. She typed in their anniversary date. Wrong. She tried his mother's birthday. Wrong again. After a few more failed attempts, she almost gave up until she tried the name of their dog, Max. The screen unlocked. Her hands trembled as she clicked through folders and emails. Most of it seemed ordinary, work documents, family photos. But then she noticed a folder tucked away deep inside his drive. It was labeled personal. Curiosity mixed with fear as she opened it. What she found made her heart sink. There were hundreds of messages, photos, and emails exchanged with someone named Lily. The messages weren't from a coworker or an old friend. They were intimate, filled with words she hadn't heard from Daniel in years. Her breath caught in her throat as she scrolled through the conversations. It had been going on for almost a year. Secret dinners, weekend getaways, promises of love. Every message felt like a dagger straight into her heart. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she held them back. Her mind raced, replaying every late night, every excuse, every lie. How could she have missed the signs? She wanted to shut the laptop and pretend she hadn't seen anything. But the more she read, the harder it was to stop. It was like watching her whole life crumble in front of her eyes. A sudden noise at the front door made her jolt. She quickly shut the laptop, wiping her tears away. Daniel walked in, looking exhausted, carrying his briefcase. He smiled weakly, giving her a quick kiss on the forehead. "Long day?" he asked, his voice casual. Sarah nodded, forcing a smile. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. She watched him move around the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water like nothing had happened. How could he act so normal while living a double life? Her mind screamed to confront him right there. But she held back. Not yet. She needed to process everything. She needed proof. That night, she barely slept, lying beside him in the same bed they'd shared for years. Every breath he took felt like a betrayal. Morning came too quickly. Daniel left early for work, kissing her goodbye like he always did. The moment the door closed behind him, Sarah's tears finally fell. She sat on the edge of the bed, clutching her chest as the pain washed over her. The man she loved, the man she trusted with her life, had been lying to her all along. But even through the heartbreak, one question haunted her. Why? What had driven him to betray her? And what was she going to do now? The sun hung low in the sky as Sarah stood by the window, staring at the empty street. Her mind was spinning, replaying the messages she had read the night before. The name Lily echoed in her head like a broken record. Every word, every promise Daniel had made to another woman felt like a punch to her chest. She wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding, but the messages were too clear, too intimate. There was no doubt left. With shaking hands, she picked up her phone. Her heart raced as she scrolled through Daniel's social media, searching for any clue. He wasn't very active online, but she noticed something she had never paid attention to before. There were small gaps in their timeline. Weekends when he claimed to be away for work, photos with friends where he stood at the edge of the frame, almost as if he was hiding. It was as if little pieces of the puzzle had always been there, waiting to be put together. Sarah's mind started connecting dots. The sudden business trips, the secretive phone calls, the perfume she once smelled on his jacket, but convinced herself it was nothing. She had buried her doubts for so long, always choosing to trust him. But now, every memory resurfaced with painful clarity. How long had she been living in a lie? Her heart clenched as she opened his email on her phone. The same password worked. As she scrolled through his inbox, her eyes landed on a name that made her breath catch. Lily. The emails were carefully tucked away in a folder named Work Projects. At first glance, they looked like harmless business conversations. But hidden between the lines were small hints, inside jokes, late-night plans, and messages that spoke of stolen moments. He had been so careful, yet not careful enough. A wave of nausea washed over her. She felt like a stranger in her own home. The walls around her seemed to close in, every framed picture mocking her with memories of a life that now felt like a lie. Her fingers hovered over the phone, debating whether to call him to demand answers. But something stopped her. If he had been lying for this long, would he even tell the truth now? Instead, she decided to dig deeper. She searched the name Lily online, tried to find any connection. It didn't take long. A social media profile appeared, a woman in her early 30s, with striking green eyes and a smile that seemed too familiar. Sarah's stomach twisted as she scrolled through the photos. Some were taken in restaurants she recognized, places Daniel had once claimed to have business meetings. There were no pictures of them together, but the timeline matched perfectly with the weekends he had been away. Her hands trembled as she clicked through the woman's posts. One caption caught her eye, grateful for the best weekend ever. The date was 2 months ago, the same weekend Daniel had told her he was visiting his brother out of town. The room felt colder. Sarah's mind raced, torn between heartbreak and rage. Every discovery cut deeper, leaving her questioning every moment they had shared. How could he lie so easily? How could he smile at her every morning while building a life with someone else? She glanced at the clock. Daniel would be home in a few hours. The thought of facing him made her stomach churn, but she couldn't act on impulse. Not yet. She needed to be sure. She needed something he couldn't deny. Taking a deep breath, she reached for his laptop again. This time, she searched through his calendar. Hidden between meetings and business trips were small, coded entries, client dinner, site visit, personal errands. They seemed innocent at first glance, but now she saw them for what they were, carefully planned lies. Her heart pounded as she opened the messaging app on his laptop. It was still logged in. The conversations were there, stretching back months. Lily's name appeared at the top. Sarah's eyes scanned the messages, reading every word. Can't wait to see you tonight. Miss you already. Wish I could wake up next to you. Tears blurred her vision, but she kept reading. The messages painted a picture of a man she barely recognized, a man who was loving, attentive, and passionate. Everything he had once been with her, he had become with someone else. Her hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms. Anger bubbled beneath her grief. She wanted to scream, to break something, to make him feel the pain she was drowning in. But she forced herself to stay calm. There would be time for that. Right now, she needed to know everything. Scrolling further, she found something that made her heart stop. A message sent just the night before. Can't wait to finally tell her the truth. Soon, I promise. Sarah's breath caught. What truth was he planning to tell? Was he going to leave her? Had he been waiting for the right moment to walk away? The thought made her heart ache. All those nights she spent waiting for him, worrying about his late hours. He had been planning a future without her. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. She had always believed that love could survive anything, that if they ever faced problems, they would face them together. But now, she realized how blind she had been. The man she thought she knew had been slipping away right in front of her eyes. Time passed in a blur as the shadows in the room grew longer. The weight of betrayal pressed heavy on her chest. Every sound in the house felt louder. The ticking clock, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floor beneath her feet. As the hours dragged on, Sarah's pain turned into something colder, something sharper. She wiped her tears away, her heart hardening with each passing minute. The woman who had spent years forgiving small lies, making excuses, and hoping for the best was gone. By the time the front door opened that evening, Sarah was no longer the same. Daniel walked in, smiling like nothing had changed. But everything had. He had no idea that the woman standing in front of him now knew the truth. She watched him closely, studying every move, every word. He kissed her cheek, told her he missed her, and asked what was for dinner. His voice was warm, his smile easy, like a man with nothing to hide. But Sarah knew better now, and as she set the table in silence, her heart pounded with the weight of everything she was about to uncover. The clinking of plates echoed through the quiet dining room as Sarah set dinner on the table. The aroma of roasted chicken filled the air, but she couldn't taste or smell anything. Her mind was a storm, swirling with anger, pain, and the weight of the truth she had discovered. Daniel sat at the head of the table, scrolling through his phone like any other evening, his face calm, unaware that his whole world was hanging by a thread. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she sat down across from him. Her eyes locked on his every move, how his fingers tapped on the screen, how he glanced at his phone every few seconds like he was waiting for something or someone. She clenched her fists under the table, fighting the urge to snatch the phone out of his hands and demand answers. But she couldn't show her anger. Not yet. They ate in silence. The only sound was the scraping of cutlery against porcelain. Daniel barely looked up, lost in whatever conversation he was having on his phone. Sarah's stomach twisted with every passing second. The messages she had read were still fresh in her mind. The way he spoke to Lily with tenderness, how he promised to see her soon. Her eyes flicked toward his phone again, and then a message popped up on the screen. It was just a quick flash, a name she recognized instantly. Lily. Sarah's heart stopped. He quickly tilted the phone away, locking the screen without a second glance. Every muscle in her body tensed. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. "You've been working late a lot lately," Sarah said, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but inside she was shaking. Daniel glanced up, surprised by the sudden question. He cleared his throat and forced a smile. "Yeah, things have been hectic at the office." The lie rolled off his tongue so easily, like he'd rehearsed it 100 times. Sarah nodded slowly, pretending to believe him, but the weight of betrayal was pressing harder against her chest. Her mind replayed every excuse he'd given over the past year. Every night he came home late, every weekend trip, every distant glance. "You must be really tired," she said softly, studying his face. "All those late nights, traveling so much." Daniel shifted in his chair, suddenly uncomfortable. His eyes darted back to his phone for a second before meeting hers. "Yeah, it's been a lot." There was a crack in his voice, small, but she caught it. Her heart pounded faster. She leaned forward slightly, her voice steady but sharper this time. "Where exactly did you go last weekend?" Daniel's hand froze midair, holding his fork. For a brief second, his face went blank, like a glitch in the mask he wore so perfectly. But he recovered quickly, forcing another smile. "I told you, I went to see my brother." The same lie he had told her countless times. Sarah's nails dug into her palms beneath the table. She wanted to scream, to throw the evidence in his face, to watch him squirm under the weight of his own lies. But she held it all back. "That's strange," she said slowly, tilting her head. "I called your brother that night. He said he hadn't seen you in months. The color drained from Daniel's face. His smile faded, replaced by a flicker of panic in his eyes. It was only for a second, but Sarah caught it. I must have missed him. I didn't stay long, he stammered. Another lie. The room felt colder. The air between them grew heavier with every passing second. Sarah's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. She couldn't lose control. Not yet. She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. You know, she said, her voice softened now, almost casual, I found something interesting today. Daniel's eyes snapped toward her. What? Sarah's pulse quickened. She could feel him squirming beneath the surface, trying to keep his calm facade intact. Your laptop was unlocked this morning, she said, her gaze locked on him. I accidentally opened a folder, something called personal. Daniel's fork clattered against his plate. His whole body went stiff. For the first time that night, he looked genuinely afraid. You went through my laptop? He asked, his voice sharp. I didn't mean to, she lied, her heart pounding harder. I was just trying to check something, but I couldn't help noticing those messages. His face turned pale. Beads of sweat formed at his temples. Sarah, it's not what you think. A bitter laugh escaped her lips before she could stop it. Not what I think, she repeated, her voice trembling now. So, you weren't planning to leave me? You weren't sneaking around behind my back for the past year? Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came out. The mask he had worn for so long was finally cracking, piece by piece. You promise her everything, Sarah whispered, tears burning in her eyes. All the things you used to promise me. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. The walls seemed to close in around them. Daniel's hands trembled as he pushed his plate away. His eyes darted toward the door, like he was calculating his escape. I'm sorry, he muttered, barely audible. I never meant to hurt you. Sarah's heart shattered all over again. Those were the words she had been waiting to hear, but they felt hollow now. Too little, too late. Why, Daniel? She whispered. Why her? He looked down at the table, unable to meet her eyes. I don't know, he mumbled. It just happened. The words cut deeper than any knife. All those nights she had waited for him. All the time she had defended him to their friends. And all he could offer was it just happened. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She wouldn't let him see her break. Not now. Instead, she stood slowly, her chair scraping against the floor. I'm not stupid, Daniel, she said quietly. I know everything. His head snapped up, panic flashing in his eyes. What do you mean? Sarah leaned in close, her voice cold. I know about Lily. I know about the trips. The messages. The promises. Daniel's face went white. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time in their marriage, he was completely exposed. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she stared into the eyes of the man she had loved for 12 years, the man who betrayed her in the worst possible way. But what neither of them knew in that moment was that by sunrise one of them would be dead. The night stretched on in unbearable silence. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second louder than the last. Sarah stood frozen in the middle of the living room, her heart pounding so hard it echoed in her ears. Daniel sat slumped on the couch, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the floor. The weight of her words still hung heavy in the air. The truth was out now. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. But the way Daniel sat there, silent, almost lifeless, made something stir deep inside Sarah. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He didn't even try to explain. It was like he already knew there was nothing left to save. Her mind raced as she stared at him, waiting for him to say something, anything. But the man she had loved for 12 years just sat there, trapped in his own guilt. Finally, she broke the silence. How long? Daniel flinched at the question, his fingers tightening around the glass of whiskey in his hand. He didn't look up. Almost a year, he muttered. Sarah's chest tightened. The words hit harder than she expected. She already knew the answer, but hearing him admit it made everything feel real. Too real. A year, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. While I was here, waiting for you every night, You were with her? Daniel's jaw clenched, but he didn't deny it. Sarah's vision blurred with hot tears, but she blinked them away. She wouldn't cry in front of him. Not anymore. Did you love her? The question hung in the air like a knife. For a moment, Daniel didn't answer. Then, slowly, he lifted his head. His bloodshot eyes met hers, and what she saw made her stomach twist. I don't know, he whispered. The words cut deeper than any confession. Not knowing was worse than yes. It meant there was something there, something real enough for him to hesitate. Sarah's heart ached, but the anger inside her was stronger now, burning hotter with every passing second. You were going to leave me, weren't you? She asked, her voice shaking. Daniel's gaze dropped again. He didn't need to answer. The silence was enough. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The life they had built together, the home, the memories, the promises, they had all been nothing but illusions. I gave you everything, she whispered. I stood by you through everything. And you threw it all away for what? Daniel's hands trembled as he brought the glass to his lips, draining the last of the whiskey in one long gulp. I'm sorry, he muttered, the words slurred and hollow. Sarah's eyes narrowed. You're not sorry, she snapped. You're just sorry you got caught. The venom in her voice made him flinch, but she didn't care. She had spent too many nights swallowing her pain, convincing herself that everything was fine. Not anymore. You were going to tell me, weren't you? She pressed. That's what your message said. Can't wait to tell her the truth. Daniel's head jerked up, his eyes wide with shock. You read my messages? Sarah's laugh was bitter, sharp. Of course I did. What did you expect, Daniel? That I'd just sit here like a fool while you plan your new life behind my back? His face flushed red. For the first time that night, anger flickered in his eyes. You had no right to go through my things. The accusation made Sarah's blood boil. No right, she shot back. I'm your wife. I had every right to know who I'd been sleeping next to all these years. Daniel's chest rose and fell quickly, his breathing shallow. The calm, composed man she had known for so long was unraveling before her eyes. A dark silence settled between them, heavier than before. The room felt smaller now, like the walls were closing in, trapping them both in the mess they had created. Sarah's mind raced. She didn't know what she wanted anymore, an apology, an explanation, or just for him to hurt the way she was hurting. But one question still lingered, clawing at the back of her mind. Why now? She asked, her voice low. Why were you finally going to tell me? Daniel's eyes darted away. His fingers tapped nervously against the empty glass. I couldn't keep living like this, he muttered. I was going to end it. Sarah's heart stopped. With her or with me? The question hung in the air, suffocating the room. Daniel's silence was louder than any answer. A cold shiver ran down Sarah's spine. Suddenly, the man sitting in front of her, the man she had shared life with, felt like a stranger. Her eyes flicked toward the bottle of whiskey on the table. It was half empty now. Daniel had been drinking more than usual lately. Another sign she had ignored. You were really going to leave me, she whispered. Daniel rubbed his face with both hands, his breathing heavy. I didn't want to hurt you. Sarah's laugh was hollow. But you did, over and over again. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She turned away, pacing across the room, trying to steady her racing heart. Every inch of this house was filled with memories. Christmas mornings, anniversary dinners, late-night talks. Now, it all felt like a cruel joke. Behind her, she heard Daniel pour another glass. The ice clinked against the glass as he took a slow sip. You think I don't know what you're doing? Sarah asked without turning around. Daniel froze. You're trying to numb yourself so you don't have to feel what you've done. His silence confirmed it. Sarah's mind spiraled deeper. The anger, the pain, it was all blurring together now. You were going to leave me, she whispered again, more to herself than to him. Just like that, like I never meant anything to you. Daniel's voice was barely audible when he spoke. I never stopped loving you. The words sliced through her, reopening every wound he'd left behind. Don't you dare say that, she snapped, spinning around to face him. You don't get to say you love me while you're sleeping with someone else. Daniel's head hung low. His shoulders slumped. I made a mistake. A mistake? Sarah's voice cracked. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, not destroying a marriage. The room felt heavier with every word. Neither of them noticed how late it was. Neither of them noticed how dark the night had grown outside. All they could see was each other. Two broken people trapped in a storm they never saw coming. The whiskey bottle emptied. The clock ticked on. Somewhere deep down, they both knew that by the time the sun rose, nothing would ever be the same again. The night felt endless, wrapping the house in a suffocating stillness. The dim glow from the kitchen light cast long shadows across the walls, flickering with every slow breath. Sarah sat motionless in the armchair, her eyes fixed on a glass of whiskey clutched tightly in Daniel's hand. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, each second pulling them closer to something neither of them could name. Daniel's gaze was distant, lost somewhere far away. His fingers traced the rim of the empty glass, his mind drowning beneath the weight of everything that had been said. His face was pale, the lines on his forehead deeper than ever before. The mask he had worn so effortlessly was completely shattered now. All that remained was a man unraveling right before her eyes. Sarah's heart twisted painfully as she watched him. There was a time when she would have done anything to comfort him, to wrap her arms around him and whisper that everything would be okay. But not anymore. The man sitting across from her wasn't the same man she had fallen in love with. He was someone else, someone who had lied to her, betrayed her, and planned to leave her behind like she never mattered. The silence stretched between them, thicker than the whiskey in his glass. Every breath felt heavier, every second louder. Sarah's eyes flicked toward the phone, lying face down on the coffee table. His lifeline, his secret. The messages were still there, pages and pages of promises he had made to another woman. "You haven't even asked if I spoke to her," Sarah said suddenly, breaking the silence. Daniel's head snapped up, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. For a second, he looked like he didn't understand. Then his whole body tensed. "What?" His voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. Sarah leaned forward slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't spoken to Lily, but he didn't know that. And right now, she wanted to see just how far he would go to protect his lies. "I called her," she lied, her voice cold and steady. "I wanted to hear from her. The truth you were never going to tell me." Daniel's face drained of color. His fingers gripped the glass, so tightly she thought it might shatter. His eyes flicked toward his phone, panic flashing behind them. You shouldn't have done that," he muttered. Sarah's heart raced. He wasn't denying it. He wasn't even asking what Lily had said. He was afraid. "I had every right," she shot back. "I deserve to know who my husband really is." Daniel's chest rose and fell quickly, his breathing shallow. For the first time all night, the calm, composed mask he clung to was completely gone. What was left behind was something darker, something she had never seen before. "What did she tell you?" he asked, his voice low. Sarah leaned back slowly, crossing her arms. "Everything." The words sliced through the air like a knife. Daniel's hand trembled around the glass. His eyes darted toward the window, then back to his phone, like he was waiting for something. Or someone. "You don't understand," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." Sarah's heart pounded harder. The way he said it, like there was something more, something he was still hiding. "What wasn't supposed to be like this?" she pressed. Daniel's eyes flicked toward her, panic flashing behind them. "Nothing," he muttered quickly. Too quickly. He was lying. Sarah's mind spun faster. Every instinct inside her was screaming now. Something was wrong. This wasn't just an affair. This was something else. Something bigger. Her eyes locked onto his phone again. "Are you waiting for her to text you?" she asked, her voice sharp. Daniel's head snapped up. His whole body went rigid. No. Another lie. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribcage. The whiskey, the panic, the phone. He was waiting for something. But it wasn't Lily. It was something worse. The seconds dragged on, stretching the silence until it felt like the whole house was holding its breath. Sarah's fingers curled around the armrest of the chair, her nails digging into the fabric. "What are you hiding, Daniel?" His eyes darted toward the door. For one terrifying second, she thought he might run. "Nothing," he muttered again, but his voice cracked. He was lying. A chill crawled down Sarah's spine. "You were never going to leave me, were you?" she whispered. Daniel's head jerked up, his bloodshot eyes wide. "You were going to disappear." His whole body froze. Sarah's heart slammed against her chest. The pieces were falling into place now, clicking together one by one. The late nights, the drinking, the sudden plans to confess everything after all this time. He hadn't been planning to leave. He'd been planning something else. Something darker. Daniel's breath quickened, his eyes flicking toward the door again. His fingers gripped the empty glass like it was the only thing holding him together. "You don't know what you're talking about," he muttered. But the fear in his voice betrayed him. Sarah's blood ran cold. "You were going to disappear," she repeated slowly, "and leave me behind to pick up the pieces, weren't you?" Daniel's chest rose and fell faster now, sweat glistening on his forehead. His gaze flicked toward the window, then back to phone. He was waiting for something, or someone. The air in the room grew heavier, pressing down on both of them. Sarah's heart pounded harder, her mind racing through every possibility. "You weren't ending it with her," she whispered. "You were ending everything." Daniel's breathing quickened. "I don't know what you're talking about," he snapped, louder this time, but his voice was shaking. Sarah's pulse thundered in her ears. "Where were you really last weekend?" she asked. Daniel's face went pale. "You said you want to see your brother, but you never did you?" His jaw clenched. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The truth was written all over his face. Sarah's heart pounded harder. "You were setting something up?" she whispered. "Weren't you?" Daniel's eyes darted toward the phone again, then back to the door. "You don't know what you're talking about," he muttered again. But she did. She knew everything now. The affair, the lies, the plan. You were going to disappear and leave me to take the fall. Daniel's whole body stiffened. For a moment, neither of them moved. The clock ticked louder and louder, filling the suffocating silence. Then, slowly, Daniel's hand reached for his phone. Sarah's heart leapt into her throat. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Daniel's fingers hovered over the screen, his breathing ragged. "I'm calling someone." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Lily?" Daniel's eyes flicked toward her, panic flashing behind them. "No." A cold shiver ran down Sarah's spine. "Then who?" Daniel's hand trembled as he set the phone down slowly, his gaze locked on hers. "You shouldn't have gone through my laptop," he whispered. Sarah's blood turned to ice. "You shouldn't have read those messages." Her heart slammed harder against her ribs. He wasn't afraid of losing her. He was afraid of what she knew. The whiskey bottle sat empty on the table. The clock ticked on. Outside, the night stretched on, dark and endless. Neither of them noticed the faint glow of headlights pulling up outside. Neither of them noticed a shadow moving across the porch. By the time they did, it would be too late.